The year was 2147, and Earth had finally made contact with an alien species. They called themselves the Valens, tall, insect-like creatures with shimmering exoskeletons that reflected light in strange patterns. Their arrival was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Humanity had dreamed of this moment for centuries, but no one expected the Valens to be so dismissive. From the moment they landed their massive starship in orbit around Earth, it was clear they didn't think much of humans. A group of human representatives gathered aboard the Valen vessel for a diplomatic meeting. The room was cold, metallic, and filled with an eerie hum that seemed to vibrate through everyone's bones. At the center of the human delegation sat Jack Monroe, a retired military officer with graying hair and sharp eyes. He wasn't there because he wanted to be. He'd been asked by the government to attend as an advisor. Jack rarely spoke during these meetings, preferring to observe, but his silence only drew more attention from the Valens. One of them, a tall alien named Calathar, stood at the front of the room. His voice was deep and resonant, almost musical, yet carried an edge of disdain. "Your kind tells stories," he said, addressing the humans. "Stories of warriors who fought great battles and achieved impossible victories. We find these tales amusing." Jack clenched his jaw but said nothing. Beside him, Lieutenant Lisa Hartman shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She was young, eager, and passionate about defending humanity's honor. When Calathar chuckled softly, she couldn't hold back any longer. "Amusing?" she blurted out. "You think our history is just entertainment?" Calathar tilted his head, his large, multifaceted eyes glinting like polished gemstones. "Is it not? Your legends speak of heroes who turned the tide of war with clever tricks or sheer willpower. Yet your species is fragile, weak compared to ours. How can such beings accomplish what you claim?" Lisa opened her mouth to argue, but Jack placed a firm hand on her arm, signaling her to stay quiet. He knew better than to rise to the bait. Instead, he studied the alien closely. Calathar's tone wasn't just mocking, it was curious, as if he genuinely wanted to understand why humans clung to these stories. Jack decided to let him talk, at least for now. "Take your general Henry Mitchell," Calathar continued, pacing slowly across the floor. "You call him a war hero, yet his tactics sound primitive. Outnumbered, outgunned, yet somehow victorious. It sounds like fiction designed to comfort frightened minds." This time, even Jack felt a flicker of irritation. General Mitchell wasn't just a name in a book. He was a real person, someone Jack had served under early in his career. He remembered the man's calm under pressure, his ability to inspire loyalty, and the way he could turn chaos into order with a single command. To hear Mitchell dismissed so casually stung. But instead of arguing, Jack leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. His expression remained neutral, unreadable. Around him, other members of the delegation exchanged uneasy glances. They were used to Jack's quiet demeanor, but today it felt different. It was as though he was waiting for something, for the right moment to strike. Calathar noticed Jack's lack of response and paused mid-step. "You do not defend your hero?" he asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Or perhaps you agree with us. Perhaps you know these tales are exaggerations." Jack met the alien's gaze without flinching. "Maybe," he said simply. "Or maybe you're underestimating us." The room fell silent. For the first time since the meeting began, Calathar seemed unsure of himself. He stared at Jack for a long moment before turning away, muttering something in his own language. Whatever it meant, it wasn't pleasant. As the meeting dragged on, Jack kept his thoughts to himself. He knew the Valens weren't going to change their minds overnight, but he also knew that actions spoke louder than words, and sooner or later, the aliens would get a chance to see exactly what humans were capable of. End of document. The next day, tensions between the humans and the Valens remained high. The aliens continued to mock human legends, their laughter echoing through the cold, metallic halls of their starship. Jack Monroe sat quietly at the back of the meeting room, his face unreadable. He wasn't one to waste energy on arguments, especially when they wouldn't lead anywhere meaningful. But Lieutenant Lisa Hartman was growing restless. Her hands gripped the edge of the table as she listened to Calthar's latest round of insults. "Your General Mitchell," Calthar said with a smirk, "is no hero. He is a myth created by weaklings desperate for hope. Tell me, do you truly believe such a man existed?" Lisa couldn't take it anymore. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You want proof?" she snapped. "Fine. Let's test your so-called superiority. Run a simulation based on one of his battles. Show us how easily you'd crush him." Jack frowned slightly but didn't intervene. He knew Lisa was impulsive, but her challenge had struck a nerve. The Valens exchanged glances, their insectoid faces unreadable. Finally, Calthar stepped forward, his voice dripping with arrogance. "A simulation? Very well. We will recreate this great battle of your hero and see if he lives up to your praise. But there's a condition," Calthar added, turning his piercing gaze toward Jack. You seem unusually calm about all this. You will oversee the demonstration. If your legend is so impressive, prove it to us." Jack hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. He could feel the weight of the other humans' eyes on him, their hopes resting squarely on his shoulders. "All right," he said simply, "but don't say I didn't warn you." The Valens led the group to a large chamber filled with glowing screens and humming machines. In the center of the room was a massive holographic display, ready to project the simulation. Calthar gestured for Jack to step forward. "Tell us about this battle," he said. "Explain what made your hero so special." Jack took a deep breath and began describing the Battle of New Chicago, a brutal conflict during the Second Global Conflict. General Henry Mitchell had been vastly outnumbered, leading a small force of soldiers against an enemy army equipped with superior weapons and technology. Despite the odds, Mitchell had used clever tactics, exploiting every weakness in the enemy's strategy. His plan relied on deception, speed, and an unshakable belief in his men. As Jack spoke, the Valens programmed the details into their system. On the holographic display, the battlefield came to life. A sprawling cityscape littered with crumbling buildings and smoking ruins. Soldiers appeared, moving across the terrain like tiny figures in a diorama. One side represented Mitchell's forces, while the other belonged to the enemy, now controlled by Calthar himself. "This will be easy," Calthar said confidently. "Your hero may have won once, but he cannot win against logic and strength." With a flick of his clawed hand, he activated the simulation. The battle began. Calthar wasted no time launching a direct assault, sending waves of enemy troops charging toward Mitchell's position. The humans watched intently as the virtual soldiers clashed. Explosions lit up the holographic sky, and gunfire echoed through the chamber. For a moment, it seemed like Calthar might succeed. His forces overwhelmed Mitchell's defenses, pushing them back into a narrow alleyway. But then something unexpected happened. Mitchell's avatar ordered his men to retreat further, luring the enemy deeper into the ruined city. At the same time, small teams of soldiers flanked the advancing troops, cutting off their supply lines and communication. Chaos erupted among the enemy ranks. Calthar frowned, clearly surprised. This is not possible," he muttered under his breath. Zinara, the younger Valen officer standing nearby, leaned closer to the display, her antennae twitching with interest. Jack crossed his arms and gave a faint smile. General Mitchell always said the key to winning isn't just strength, it's knowing how to think ahead. The simulation wasn't over yet, but already doubt was creeping into the Valens' minds. They had underestimated humanity and its heroes, once again. End of document. The simulation continued, and the Valens watched with growing unease as General Mitchell's forces turned the tide of the battle. Calthar leaned closer to the holographic display, his clawed hands gripping the edge of the console. His earlier confidence was beginning to crack. "This is inefficient," he muttered, though his voice lacked its usual arrogance. Such tactics rely too much on chance. Jack stood silently beside him, his arms crossed. He didn't need to say anything. The unfolding events spoke for themselves. On the glowing battlefield, Mitchell's avatar commanded his troops with precision, exploiting every mistake made by Calthar's forces. The humans in the room exchanged glances, their spirits lifting as they saw their hero's strategies come to life. Lisa Hartman couldn't help but smile. She glanced at Jack, who remained calm and composed. "They didn't expect this, did they?" she whispered. "No," Jack replied quietly. "They thought we'd fold under pressure. But that's not who we are." Back on the virtual battlefield, Mitchell's soldiers had regrouped after luring the enemy into a trap. Using the narrow alleyways and ruined buildings to their advantage, they launched a surprise counterattack. Explosions erupted behind enemy lines, cutting off reinforcements and scattering their forces. The once orderly advance of Calthar's troops dissolved into chaos. "They're falling apart," Zenara observed, her large eyes scanning the display. She tilted her head, studying the movements of Mitchell's forces. "These humans, they fight differently than we do." Calthar shot her a sharp look. "Different does not mean better," he snapped. But even he couldn't deny that something remarkable was happening. His carefully planned assault was unraveling before his eyes, undone by tactics he hadn't anticipated. Jack decided it was time to explain. In a steady voice, he began narrating the key moments of the battle. "General Mitchell knew he couldn't win by brute force," he said, "so he focused on what he could control: the terrain, the timing, and the morale of his men. Every move he made was designed to confuse and divide the enemy." As Jack spoke, the simulation reflected his words. The holographic soldiers executed flanking maneuvers, ambushes, and feints with flawless coordination. The Valens watched in stunned silence as their simulated forces were pushed back, step by step, until they were forced to retreat entirely. "This isn't over," Calthar growled, refusing to admit defeat. He adjusted his strategy, ordering his remaining troops to regroup and launch a concentrated attack on Mitchell's weakened position. But even as he issued the command, Jack shook his head slightly. "That won't work," Jack said, almost casually. "Mitchell always planned for contingencies. Watch." Sure enough, just as Calthar's forces moved into position, hidden explosives detonated, collapsing a nearby building and trapping them in a kill zone. Mitchell's troops opened fire from all sides, decimating the enemy ranks. The simulation ended with the surviving enemy forces surrendering, their morale shattered. For a moment, no one spoke. The Valens stared at the display, their expressions unreadable. Finally, Zenara broke the silence. "These humans, they are not what we thought." Calthar straightened up, his antennae twitching with frustration. "It is only a simulation," he insisted. "It proves nothing." "It proves everything," Jack countered, his tone firm but calm. "Every move you saw was real. This isn't fiction, it's history. General Mitchell didn't win because he had better weapons or numbers. He won because he understood the value of strategy, teamwork, and sacrifice. Those are qualities you can't measure with technology." The room fell silent again. The Valens exchanged glances, their earlier mockery replaced by something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or even respect. Calthar clenched his fists but said nothing. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. Lisa looked at Jack, admiration shining in her eyes. "You really know how to make a point," she said softly. Jack shrugged. "Sometimes people need to see things for themselves. Even aliens." End of document. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the Valens machinery. The simulation had ended, but its impact lingered in the air like smoke after an explosion. Calthar stood frozen, his glowing eyes fixed on the now blank holographic display. His pride had taken a hit, and it showed in the rigid way he held himself. Zenara, however, seemed more intrigued than offended. She stepped closer to Jack, her antennae twitching as she studied him. "You're General Mitchell." He was real. She asked, her voice softer than before. It wasn't mockery this time. It was genuine curiosity. Jack nodded. "Every story you heard about him is true. He didn't just lead soldiers. He inspired them. He made them believe they could win, even when everything said they couldn't." Kelthar turned sharply to face Jack. "Inspiration does not win battles. Strength and logic do." "Maybe where you come from," Jack replied evenly. "But here on Earth, we've learned that strength isn't always about having the biggest guns or the most troops. Sometimes, it's about knowing how to use what you've got, and knowing when to rely on others." Zinera tilted her head, considering his words. "You speak of teamwork, of trust. These are unfamiliar concepts to us." She glanced at Kelthar, who crossed his arms and looked away. Clearly, the idea of trusting others wasn't something the Valens practiced often. Lisa Hartman leaned forward, unable to stay silent any longer. "That's why your people underestimate us. You think we're weak because we don't fight like you do. But being strong doesn't mean never asking for help. Sometimes, it means knowing when to lean on someone else." Jack shot Lisa a quick look, silently warning her not to push too hard. The last thing they needed was to provoke Kelthar further. But the damage, if it could be called that, was already done. Zinera's interest was piqued, and even Kelthar seemed to be reconsidering his earlier dismissals. "This battle," Zinera began hesitantly. "It was one moment in your history, one man's actions. Does it truly represent all humans?" "It represents what we can do when we work together," Jack said. "Mitchell wasn't alone out there. He had soldiers who trusted him, engineers who built the tools he needed, and civilians back home who supported the war effort. That's how we survive, not by being perfect, but by being persistent." Kelthar let out a low growl, clearly frustrated. "Persistence is irrelevant if you lack power." "Power isn't everything," Jack countered. "You saw that yourself in the simulation. Your forces were stronger and better equipped, but they still lost. Why? Because Mitchell understood something you don't. He knew how to adapt, how to think outside the box, and most importantly, he knew how to inspire others to follow him." The room fell silent again. The Valens exchanged glances, their insectoid faces unreadable. For a species that prided itself on logic and efficiency, the idea of inspiration was foreign, and perhaps even unsettling. But it was also undeniable. The simulation had proven that much. Finally, Kelthar spoke. "If this General Mitchell was so remarkable, why did he not lead your entire species to victory? Why does humanity remain divided and fragile?" Jack sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Because we're human. We make mistakes. We argue. We fail. But when it matters most, we come together. Mitchell didn't solve all our problems. He gave us a blueprint for how to face them." Zinera stepped closer to the console, her gaze drifting to the empty space where the simulation had played out moments ago. "Perhaps there is more to your kind than we assumed," she admitted quietly. Kelthar stiffened, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. But he didn't argue. Instead, he turned to Jack. "Tell us more about this, General Mitchell. What made him different from other humans?" Jack hesitated, then nodded. "All right. But it's not just about him. It's about the people around him, the ones who believed in him and fought alongside him. If you want to understand Mitchell, you need to understand them too." As Jack began sharing stories of the soldiers, engineers, and civilians who had contributed to Mitchell's success, the Valens listened intently. For the first time, they weren't laughing at human legends, they were trying to understand them. End of document. Later that evening, Jack Monroe sat alone in his quarters aboard the human delegation's ship. The room was small and dimly lit, with a single window offering a view of the Valen starship hanging like a metallic moon in the distance. He stared out at it, lost in thought. The day's events had stirred memories he hadn't revisited in years, memories of General Henry Mitchell and the lessons he'd learned under his command. Jack closed his eyes, letting the images come flooding back. He saw himself as a young soldier, fresh out of training, standing nervously in front of Mitchell during a briefing. The general wasn't what Jack had expected. He wasn't loud or intimidating. Instead, he carried an air of quiet confidence that put people at ease. His instructions were clear, his plans well thought out, but what stood out most was his ability to connect with his men. He didn't just give orders, he inspired trust. One memory stood out vividly: a cold, rainy night during the Battle of New Chicago. Jack and a handful of other soldiers had been pinned down by enemy fire, their morale crumbling. They were outnumbered and running low on ammunition. Just when hope seemed lost, Mitchell appeared through the chaos. He didn't shout or demand action. Instead, he knelt beside them, mud splattered across his uniform, and said simply, "We're not done yet. Follow me." That moment had changed Jack forever. It wasn't just about bravery, it was about leadership. Mitchell didn't lead because of rank or authority. He led because people believed in him. And that belief made all the difference. A soft knock at the door pulled Jack from his thoughts. He turned to see Lisa Hartman standing there, her expression hesitant. "Can I come in?" she asked. Jack nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" Lisa hesitated before speaking. "I wanted to thank you," she said finally, "for standing up to Calthar today, for defending General Mitchell. I know it wasn't easy." Jack shrugged. "It's not about me. It's about showing them who we really are." "I know," Lisa replied. "But still, it meant something. To hear you talk about Mitchell like that. You knew him, didn't you?" Jack leaned back in his chair, nodding slowly. "Yeah, I did. Early in my career. He taught me a lot. Not just about fighting, but about leading. About being human." Lisa smiled faintly. "You're a lot like him, you know." Jack chuckled softly. "Hardly. Mitchell was one of a kind." "Maybe," Lisa said, "but you share his calmness, his patience. You don't let insults get to you. You wait for the right moment to act. That's why you're here, isn't it? Because you know how to handle situations like this." Jack didn't respond immediately. He looked out the window again, watching the distant glow of the Valen ship. "It's not about handling situations," he said after a pause. "It's about understanding people. The Valens think they're better than us because they have better tech and stronger bodies. But strength isn't everything. Sometimes it's the things you can't measure that matter most, like courage, loyalty, and heart." Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think they'll ever truly understand us?" "I don't know," Jack admitted, "but maybe they'd started to. Today proved that much. They may never fully grasp what makes us tick, but if they walk away with even a little respect for our species, then we've done something right." The two sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Lisa stood up. "Well, whatever happens next, I'm glad you're part of this. We couldn't ask for a better representative." Jack gave her a small smile. "Let's just hope it's enough." As Lisa left the room, Jack returned his gaze to the stars outside. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The Valens were proud, and changing their perception of humanity would take time. But he also knew that stories had power, especially when they were true. And if there was one thing Jack understood, it was the importance of telling the right story at the right time. *** End of document. ***. The next morning, the humans returned to the Valen starship for another round of discussions. This time, the atmosphere felt different. The Valens weren't laughing or mocking. They were watching, listening, and observing with a newfound curiosity. Calthar still carried himself with pride, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He seemed less dismissive, more thoughtful. Jack Monroe walked into the meeting room with Lisa Hartman by his side. As they took their seats, Zinera approached them, her movements deliberate and careful. "We have considered your words," she said. addressing Jack directly. "Your General Mitchell, he was not just a warrior. He was a leader who inspired others." Jack nodded. "That's right. Leadership isn't about giving orders. It's about earning trust. Mitchell earned it every day through his actions." Calthar stepped forward, his voice firm, but without its usual edge. "You claim this man was extraordinary, yet even extraordinary beings can fail. What happened to him after the war?" Jack hesitated for a moment before answering. Mitchell didn't live long after the war. He worked tirelessly to rebuild what had been lost, helping soldiers adjust to civilian life and advocating for peace, but the stress took its toll. He passed away quietly, surrounded by those who loved him. The room fell silent as the Valens absorbed this information. To them, death was often seen as failure, a sign of weakness. But Jack's tone carried no shame or regret. Instead, it conveyed respect and admiration. Lisa leaned forward slightly. "General Mitchell gave everything he had for his people, for his soldiers, and for the future. That's why we remember him. Not because he was perfect, but because he cared." Zenara tilted her head, her large eyes reflecting genuine interest. "Such devotion, it is unfamiliar to us. Our leaders are chosen for their strength and efficiency. Emotions like care and sacrifice are seen as distractions. Maybe that's why you struggle to understand us," Lisa said softly. "We're not afraid to feel. We're not afraid to give everything for something bigger than ourselves." Calthar crossed his arms, clearly uneasy with the conversation. "Emotion clouds judgment. Logic and strategy win wars." "Not always," Jack countered. "Sometimes, emotion gives people the courage to keep fighting when logic tells them to quit." Mitchell knew that better than anyone. To emphasize his point, Jack shared another story about Mitchell, this one from the final days of the Battle of New Chicago. Outnumbered and outgunned, many of his soldiers wanted to surrender. But Mitchell refused to give up. Instead, he gathered them around a makeshift fire, sharing stories of home and reminding them why they were fighting. By dawn, their spirits had been reignited, and they went on to secure a miraculous victory. As Jack spoke, the Valens listened intently. Even Calthar seemed affected, though he tried to hide it. When Jack finished, Zenara spoke. "Perhaps there is value in what you call emotion. Perhaps it makes your species stronger than we realized." Calthar frowned but didn't argue. Instead, he turned to Jack. "If your General Mitchell was so remarkable, why does humanity still struggle? Why do you fight among yourselves?" Jack sighed. "Because we're human. We make mistakes. We let fear and anger divide us. But when it matters most, we come together." Mitchell showed us how to do that, not just during the war, but afterward too. His legacy wasn't just about winning battles. It was about building bridges. The Valens exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. For the first time, they weren't dismissing human legends. They were trying to learn from them. End of document. The discussions continued, and the mood in the Valen starship shifted even further. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was respect. Slowly but surely, the Valens were beginning to see humans differently. Jack Monroe noticed the change in their body language, the way they leaned forward when he spoke or exchanged thoughtful glances after his stories. Even Calthar, who had been so quick to mock humanity at first, seemed more reflective. Zenara stepped closer to Jack during a break in the conversation. "Your General Mitchell. He gave his life for others. But what about the soldiers who followed him? What made them willing to sacrifice everything?" Jack paused, considering her question. He knew the answer instinctively. It was something he'd seen firsthand as a young soldier under Mitchell's command. "It wasn't just loyalty," he said finally. "It was trust. They believed in him because he believed in them. And that belief made them stronger than they ever thought possible." Lisa Hartman added softly, "It's not just generals or leaders who make sacrifices. Every soldier out there risks their life, not just for themselves, but for the person next to them. for their families back home, for the future they hope to build. Zanera tilted her head, clearly intrigued. You fight for others, not just for victory. That's right, Jack replied. War isn't just about winning battles. It's about protecting what matters. Sometimes, it's about giving someone else a chance to live a better life. Kelthar interjected, his tone sharp but less hostile than before. Such thinking is inefficient. Sacrifices should only be made if they guarantee success. Not everything can be measured in outcomes, Jack countered calmly. Sometimes the act of trying is enough. The fact that we care, that we're willing to stand up for each other, that's what makes us human. To illustrate his point, Jack told another story. He spoke of a young soldier named Daniel, barely out of his teens, who had saved an entire platoon during the Battle of New Chicago. Outnumbered and surrounded, Daniel had stayed behind to hold off the enemy while his comrades retreated. He didn't survive, but his actions ensured the survival of dozens of others. When we heard what Daniel had done, it hit all of us hard, Jack said. But it also reminded us why we were fighting. Not for glory or power, but for each other. That's the kind of spirit General Mitchell inspired in people. The room grew quiet as the Valens absorbed his words. Zanera's antennae twitched slightly, a sign of deep thought. Your species values these acts of selflessness, yet you admit you are flawed. How do you reconcile this? We don't always, Lisa admitted. We argue, we fail, we hurt each other. But moments like Daniel's remind us of what we're capable of. They remind us to be better. Kelthar frowned, still struggling to fully grasp the concept. Your emotions drag you to irrationality. How do you maintain order? It's not about suppressing emotions, Jack explained. It's about channeling them. Fear becomes courage. Anger becomes determination. Love becomes sacrifice. That balance is what keeps us moving forward. For the first time, Kelthar didn't respond with skepticism. Instead, he turned to Zanera, exchanging a glance that suggested he was reconsidering his earlier judgments. The Valens weren't ready to embrace humanity's emotional complexity, but they were starting to understand it. Finally, Zanera spoke. Perhaps there is wisdom in your ways. Perhaps strength is not solely defined by logic or power. Jack nodded. Strength comes in many forms. Sometimes, it's the quiet kind, the kind that holds people together when everything falls apart. As the meeting drew to a close, the Valens appeared more contemplative than dismissive. For the first time, they saw humans not as weaklings, but as survivors. Flawed, yes, but resilient. And as Jack stood to leave, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something greater. End of document. The next day, the Valens surprised everyone by inviting Jack Monroe and the human delegation to share more stories. Not just about General Mitchell, but about other figures from Earth's history. It was a request no one had expected, least of all Jack. He exchanged a glance with Lisa Hartman, who gave him an encouraging smile. The shift in tone was undeniable. The Valens were genuinely interested now. In the meeting room aboard the Valen starship, Zanera took the lead this time. Her voice carried none of the mockery or arrogance that had marked Kelthar's earlier interactions. Tell us about others like your General Mitchell, she said. Who else has shaped your species? Jack thought for a moment before speaking. There are many, he began, but let me tell you about Harriet Tubman. She lived centuries ago, during a time when humans enslaved each other based on the color of their skin. Harriet was born into slavery, but she escaped and then risked her life repeatedly to help others do the same. Kelthar tilted his head, clearly puzzled. She fought battles. Not with weapons, Jack replied. Her fight was different. She traveled through dangerous territory, guiding enslaved people to freedom using secret routes called the Underground Railroad. Every journey was a risk. If she'd been caught, she would have been killed, or worse. Zanera's antennae twitched, and yet she continued. She did, Jack said. because she believed in something bigger than herself. Freedom. Justice. She didn't fight for glory or power. She fought because it was right. Lisa added softly, Harriet wasn't physically strong, and she didn't have advanced technology. But she had courage and faith in humanity. That made her unstoppable. The Valens listened intently, their expressions unreadable. Kelthar leaned forward slightly. What became of her? She lived a long life after helping hundreds escape slavery, Jack explained. But her legacy is what matters most. She showed people that even in the darkest times, there's hope, if you're willing to stand up for it. Zinara nodded slowly. Such determination, it is admirable. Encouraged by their interest, Jack shared another story, this time about Audie Murphy, a young soldier from the 20th century who became one of America's most decorated heroes. Audie was barely 18 when he joined the military, Jack said. He was small and quiet, not someone you'd expect to become a legend. But when his unit faced overwhelming odds in battle, he climbed onto a burning tank and used its machine gun to hold off an entire enemy force. Kelthar frowned. Why did he do this? Surely survival would have been wiser. He knew his friends were counting on him, Jack replied. That's why he stayed. Not because he wanted fame, but because he cared about the people around him. Lisa chimed in again. It's not just soldiers or leaders who make sacrifices. There are ordinary people who change the world too, like Malala Yousafzai, a girl who stood up for education even though it put her life at risk. The Valens listened closely as Jack described Malala's bravery in advocating for girls' education despite threats and violence. She survived an assassination attempt, Jack said. And instead of being silenced, she spoke louder. Today, she inspires millions around the globe. By the end of the session, the Valens seemed almost captivated. They asked questions, probed details, and occasionally exchanged glances filled with silent understanding. For the first time, they weren't seeing humans as weak or primitive. They were seeing resilience, compassion, and purpose. As the meeting concluded, Zinara approached Jack. Your legends, they are not just stories. They are lessons. Lessons about courage, sacrifice, and hope. Jack smiled faintly. Exactly. And those lessons remind us who we can be, even when we're at our worst. Kelthar remained quiet, but his posture suggested a newfound respect. The barriers between the two species were still there, but cracks had begun to form. Through these shared stories, the Valens were starting to see humanity not as inferior, but as extraordinary in its own flawed way. End of document. The days that followed marked a turning point in the relationship between humans and the Valens. The aliens, once dismissive and condescending, now approached their human counterparts with cautious curiosity. Kelthar still carried himself with pride, but his sharp edges had softened. Zinara, on the other hand, seemed eager to learn more about humanity's complexities. She often lingered after meetings, asking questions about Earth's history, culture, and values. One evening, as the humans prepared to leave the Valen starship, Kelthar called Jack Monroe aside. His tone was measured, almost hesitant, an unusual change from his earlier arrogance. Your legends, they reveal much about your species, he said. But there is one thing I do not understand. Why do you share these stories with us? What do you hope to gain? Jack met the alien's gaze without flinching. We're not trying to gain anything, he replied. We're just sharing who we are. If you want to understand us, then you need to know what drives us, what makes us fight, survive, and keep going even when things seem impossible. Kelthar considered this for a moment before nodding slowly. Perhaps there is wisdom in that. But tell me, why does your species value cooperation so deeply? Among the Valens, strength and independence are prized above all else. It's simple, Jack said. Humans aren't meant to face the world alone. We've always been stronger together. Whether it's building communities, fighting wars, or exploring space, we achieve more when we work as a team. That's not weakness, it's survival. Zinara joined the conversation, her large eyes glowing faintly. "Your willingness to rely on others. It is both fascinating and foreign to us. Yet it seems to have served your species well." "It has," Lisa Hartman added, stepping closer. "And it's not just about relying on others. It's about trusting them. Trusting that they'll have your back, no matter what. That's how we overcome challenges." Kalthar exchanged a glance with Zanara, and for the first time, there was no trace of mockery in his expression. "Perhaps we have underestimated you," he admitted reluctantly. "Your species may lack our strength and technology, but you possess something we do not, a unity born of shared purpose." Jack nodded. "That's exactly right. Strength isn't just about muscles or weapons. It's about standing together, even when the odds are against you." The conversation shifted as Zanara brought up an idea that surprised everyone. "There is a distant planet we have discovered," she said. "Its surface holds ancient artifacts, remnants of a civilization long gone. We believe they may hold valuable knowledge, but the terrain is treacherous. Would you join us in exploring it?" Jack hesitated. The offer was unexpected, and he wasn't sure if humanity was ready for such a partnership. But before he could respond, Lisa spoke up. "It could be a chance to strengthen our bond," she said, "to show that humans and Valens can work together." Kalthar nodded. "We would benefit from your adaptability and resourcefulness, and perhaps you could learn from us as well." Jack thought carefully before answering. He knew this decision wouldn't just affect him. It would shape the future of relations between their species. Finally, he looked at Zanara and Kalthar. "All right," he said. "We'll go. But only if we approach this as equals, not as teacher and student, but as partners." The Valens exchanged glances, clearly pleased with his response. For the first time, there was a sense of mutual respect in the air. As Jack and Lisa returned to their ship, they couldn't help but feel hopeful. This mission wouldn't be easy, but it represented a new beginning. A chance to prove that two very different species could find common ground. That night, as Jack stared out at the stars, he felt a quiet sense of pride. Humanity had faced countless challenges throughout its history, but none quite like this. Working alongside the Valens wouldn't just test their abilities, it would test their ability to trust, communicate, and grow together. "Do you think we're ready for this?" Lisa asked softly, joining him by the window. "We'll have to be," Jack replied. "Because if we can pull this off, it might just change everything. For both of us." End of document. The journey to the distant planet began with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The Valen flagship led the way, its sleek metallic form cutting through the vastness of space. Aboard the human vessel, Jack Monroe stood on the bridge alongside Lisa Hartman, watching as the alien world grew larger in the viewport. It was a strange and foreboding place, its surface covered in jagged mountains, swirling storms, and eerie glowing formations that pulsed faintly under the dim light of a distant sun. "This is it," Lisa said softly, her voice tinged with awe. "Our first real mission together." Jack nodded, his expression calm but thoughtful. "It's not just about exploring this planet. It's about proving we can work side by side with them." He gestured toward the Valen ship ahead. "If we succeed, it could change how they see us forever." As the two ships descended into the planet's atmosphere, turbulence rocked both vessels. The humans gripped their seats tightly, while the Valens remained eerily still, their exoskeletons shimmering faintly in the low light. When they finally landed, the air outside was thick and misty, filled with strange scents that made Lisa wrinkle her nose. Kalthar and Zanara greeted the humans at the edge of the landing site. Their insectoid forms towered over the group, but for the first time, there was no trace of superiority in their posture. Instead, they seemed cautious, uncertain of what lay ahead. "We will split into teams," Kalthar announced. "Humans and Valens will work together to gather data and retrieve artifacts. Trust is key." Jack stepped forward, meeting Kalthar's gaze. "Then let's get to it." The teams moved cautiously across the alien terrain, scanning for signs of the ancient civilization. Jack found himself paired with Zanara, while Lisa worked alongside Calthar. At first, communication was awkward. Both species had different ways of interpreting the environment. But as hours passed, they began to adapt. Zanara pointed out subtle energy signatures that Jack's equipment couldn't detect, while Jack's instincts helped them navigate treacherous paths. "Your senses are remarkable," Zanara admitted after one close call, when Jack spotted a hidden crevice that might have trapped them. "You rely on intuition more than logic." "It's not always reliable," Jack replied with a small smile. "But sometimes, gut feelings save your life." Meanwhile, Lisa and Calthar discovered a partially buried structure, a massive archway etched with glowing symbols. "This must be important," Lisa said, brushing dust from the markings. "Can you translate it?" Calthar studied the symbols intently. "It speaks of unity and survival. Perhaps this civilization valued cooperation, much like yours." Lisa glanced at him, surprised by the comparison. "Maybe they were more like us than we thought." By the end of the day, the combined efforts of humans and Valens had uncovered several artifacts and recorded valuable data. As they regrouped at the landing site, exhaustion was evident on everyone's faces, but so was satisfaction. "This was productive," Calthar admitted grudgingly. "Your adaptability proved useful. And your technology kept us safe," Jack added, nodding toward the Valen scanners. "We make a good team." Zanara stepped forward, her antennae twitching slightly. "Perhaps this is only the beginning. There is much we can learn from each other." As the ships prepared to leave the planet, Jack stood on the bridge once more, staring out at the fading horizon. Lisa joined him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think we've earned their respect?" she asked. "I think we've started to," Jack replied. "Respect isn't given all at once. It's earned over time. But this mission showed them that we're not just survivors. We're partners." The journey back to Earth was quiet, but the mood was lighter. For the first time, the Valens treated the humans not as inferiors, but as equals. And though challenges lay ahead, Jack felt a spark of hope. Humanity's legends had taught them resilience, courage, and unity. And now, those lessons were bridging the gap between two very different species. As the stars stretched endlessly beyond the ship's windows, Jack allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. The greatest legends, he realized, weren't just stories of the past. They were the ones yet to be written. ****End of document****.